more or less what we're seeing at the moment is within the parameters of what was modelled? You'd be surprised, wouldn't you, if there are any big changes tomorrow? If any changes at all?
Yeah, no, I would be surprised. I think what's the turning point that we saw at the start of the week with the case rate coming down, and remember, we have seen a mass rise in testing over the last few weeks, and in part that might be because more people are going forward for tests. The schools return, which sometimes sees increases in tests as well. That's helped push the cases up, but the testing numbers have been relatively stable now for a few days, and the cases are coming down. And the percentage of tests coming back positive are coming down. And it's not just Wales as a whole, kind of looking at the national number, this is happening as well, Gareth. It's happening kind of across nearly all 22 local authorities in Wales. So with that turning point in the data, I think it'd be more difficult to kind of for the First Minister to come on tomorrow and introduce further restrictions, because obviously he didn't decide last week to do anything. And we've got more positive news this week. And he's always saying he's looking at the data.
Vaccine passports then. Now, you and the First Minister clearly have different political persuasions, but I think you might both agree that perhaps vaccine passports are not the way to go, or instinctively you might think that. Why is that? Why are you against them?
Well, the reason I'm against them is a couple of reasons for that. Putting kind of my statistician's head and the Data Protection kind of Acts, this is a minefield for business in terms of if they're collecting a lot of this information on people's kind of personal health information. It puts a lot of onus on the businesses themselves. And I think you've just been talking about kind of businesses worried about potentially these coming in. And I think logistically it's going to be very hard for the businesses for the vaccine passports. And then politically, with Boris Johnson kind of putting them on hold, he hasn't ruled them out now. He's left them as kind of something he may return to during the winter if cases go up in England. It'll be very difficult because you've got a large range of South Wales, Mid Wales and North Wales who could potentially just go over the border to do kind of go to nightclubs and things. So it might damage the Welsh economy a little bit from that. So I think there's a lot of things with the border and the way England go which will determine what Wales should really do on that, Gareth.
And I think a lot of people, politicians, medics, you, me, all looking, Jamie, at the pressure on the NHS, and will it come to a point whereby that pressure on hospitals is too great for it to cope with much else other than COVID? Do you see it easing at all before the winter? I mean, we're only September now and it's under a lot of pressure already. Is it going to get worse, do you think?
I think it's inevitable that the cases will probably get worse as we go in towards the winter because people will be more indoors, and we know then some people will end up in hospital. I think we've had the announcements by the health boards in recent weeks about them kind of stopping visitors going in, and Public Health Wales themselves, they actually publish information that looks at how many people may be catching the virus in hospital, either definitely or probably catching it. I've just been kind of crunching some of the numbers today, Gareth, and we're probably seeing, if you compare the kind of how many people are going in to how many people are actually in hospital, we may start to see more people catching the virus in hospital that's increasing the numbers than actually people who are going in as fresh kind of new admissions to the hospital. So that's always going to be a challenge. That's going to probably continue to rise, and they've kind of stopping visitors going in to try and control that. So that's going to be, I think, Gareth, the critical measure for us as we go through the winters. How much pressure is going to be placed on the NHS? But if you go back a few years before the pandemic, operations were always being cancelled. The NHS is always under pressure. So it may be that this year and COVID might just push it a little bit harder. And remember, Gareth, the staff have had a really difficult 18 months as well. They haven't had a break with regards to all of this because COVID has been coming back all the time.
And look, no one wants to talk about lockdown, but I'll throw it in. At the moment, that will be very difficult for the Welsh Government to do because the furlough scheme's about to end. So any sort of lockdown measures in Wales will be more likely perhaps if the UK government in England went down those roads, because they can bring back in furlough, they can bring back in those really big economic support packages.
Yeah, and I think we had those issues, didn't we, the back end of last year, where I think the First Minister was calling for an extension to the furlough scheme. That wasn't accepted by the UK government. Then they did go and kind of extend the furlough scheme. So critics in Wales would argue that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak will obviously look at, if cases are going up in England, they will act a lot faster and put the financial support in than if they're going up faster in, say, Scotland and Wales. So it does kind of tie the First Minister's hands with regards to the furlough scheme, because if you're going to ask people to kind of close your business, who's going to fund that? That'll obviously be discussions that are ongoing. And Boris Johnson, if you just look at kind of the political will over the border at the moment, he doesn't seem to be keen on returning to that. The kind of the measures that they've talked about for their plan B are things like returning to masks, potentially asking people to work from home, and they're kind of banking on the vaccine over there. So the booster rollout that started in Wales and then vaccinating children seems to be their way out of this, rather than closing businesses and stopping people going about their daily lives.
Great to speak to you again, Jamie. Thanks very much for that. That's Jamie Jenkins.